Welcome to Endeavour Solutions demonstration of Microsoft Dynamics GP with multi-entity corporations. Endeavour Solutions has been working with Microsoft Dynamics, in particular Great Plains, for over 25 years and has key offices in Toronto, Halifax, Montreal, and London, supporting clients across Canada and remotely in the U.S. Our three lines of business are advisory, implementation, and support for Microsoft Dynamics GP and Microsoft Dynamics CRM. The advisory team advises clients on ERP or CRM selection. They do business process reengineering, optimizing clients' choices and strategies. The implementation team works with the Microsoft Dynamics family of products, extending that out to mobile, to web, to cloud with Office 365 and Azure, as well as a variety of other third-party tools. The optimization and support team include the help desk, which assists over 400 clients across Canada and the U.S. For more information on Endeavour Solutions, visit us at www.endeavorsolutions.ca. Follow us also on LinkedIn and on Twitter. So as mentioned, today we're going to be looking at multi-entity companies using Dynamics GP. In this demo, we'll do some basic introduction and navigation. We'll look at how easy it is to use Multi-Entity Manager by Binary Stream in conjunction with Microsoft Dynamics GP. We'll look at data entry by doing some basic transactions, and we'll look at some advanced reporting. But what are the benefits or the advantages of using Multi-Entity Manager with Dynamics GP? Typically, if you have more than one company in Dynamics GP, so let's say, for example, for the case of this demo, you have 15 companies, you would have 15 separate Dynamics GP databases. Of course, that means you have a lot of redundant master records, 15 of every vendor, every customer, every item, every employee. If we could bring all of that into a single database, create one master record, and simply share it across those companies, think of the efficiencies gained there. What about processes that require you to constantly log out and log in, to move from one company to another over and over and over again throughout the day? Or other processes, for example, like the AP check run. In order to do the check run at the end of the month, I would have to log into each of my 15 companies, select the checks, build the batch, cut the checks, log out, do it again 15 times to satisfy all of my vendor payables. Think of the IT maintenance tasks that grow in size because I have 15 databases. Backing up the database 15 times. Doing upgrades or hot fixes 15 times. Again, a single database, we gain all of those efficiencies. Multi-Entity Manager also simplifies, automates, and ensures the accuracy of those intercompany due-to, due-from transactions. First thing that comes up when people hear about multiple companies in one database is, what about security? Multi-Entity Manager allows you to restrict or grant access to individual companies by GP user. That assists with regulatory compliance. And reporting is simplified. Instead of running the report across 15 different companies, we run it once, selecting which companies to work in, so you can spend more time running your business, less time running reports. Let's jump into Dynamics GP and see how this works. Here we are in Dynamics GP 2015 R2. This is the latest version. We're looking at the navigation page or the home page for the user SA. That's how I'm logged in now. And of course, as we go through the individual modules, we see the familiar layout. There's the setup area that changes the way this module talks to the rest of Dynamics GP. If we want to create a new master record like a vendor, we go to cards. We want to get some work done, we go to transactions. Now, while Multi-Entity Manager is fully integrated with the rest of Dynamics GP, it also has its own home page where we can set some of the security settings, various utilities and cards and so on. Let's focus on the setup, and then we'll go look at some transactions. First thing to notice here, when I log in, I'm logged in as a systems administrator. My home company or my division is 000. We can see in the menu bar up at the top that I am in fact logged in to 000 or head office. Now in a standard GP environment, if I've got 15 companies and I want to switch from company 000 to company 100, I would have to shut down all of my screens, come down here to the lower left, in the list, find the company that I'm looking for, click OK, and GP will then proceed to log me out, log me back in. That may only take a couple minutes, but if I'm doing that many times a day to access my 15 companies, and I'm one of many employees doing that, do the math. There's a lot of time wasted simply watching screens change. With Multi-Entity Manager, I simply come up here, tell it which company I want to work in next, click OK, and I've switched companies. It's now a matter of seconds rather than a matter of minutes. And I don't even have to do that if I simply want to change companies at a single transaction level. And we'll show you that when we get to the transaction side of this. Under company, this is where I'm going to define what this 000 represents. It's actually a segment in my chart of accounts. So if I pull up a GL account, doesn't matter which one, you'll notice I have a 3-segment chart. My first segment is this 000. I have my natural account 1100. My third segment, 00, the 2-digit segment. In the multi-entity setup, shown here on the right, I'm simply telling Multi-Entity Manager how to interpret that chart. So my division is segment 1. My cost center is segment 3. Well, what if you don't work with divisions or cost centers? Well, we've got dynamic labels here. So instead, I might want to work with companies and departments. So now my company segment, segment 1, that's the 000, 100, 200, 300, and so on. My department is segment 3. That's the 2-digit segment at the end. Let's move on. In the lower section of this screen, we see the modules of Dynamics GP that Multi-Entity Manager works with. What we call our core module handles anything at the cash or the bank rec level, the general ledger transactions, accounts payable, and accounts receivable. From there, you simply add on the multi-entity modules that correspond to the way that you're running Dynamics GP. Do you need sales order processing? By entity, we add the multi-entity SOP module. Do you need payroll, fixed assets, project accounting? It's a modular system designed to grow the way your business does. Under security, we can turn on or off various levels of security. We're going to talk about a couple of these. I'll show you the vendor security in action, but we can do things where we can lock out, for example, the accounts. If we turn on account security, I would only be able to see the accounts that belong to the companies that I have access to. Explain that more in just a couple minutes. There's other switches that would be set up here and turned on module by module as part of the discovery process in implementing Multi-Entity Manager for you. Under the user entity, this is where I can choose which companies my employees can see, either by user class or by individual user. For example, there's the list of companies showing on the right-hand side. On the left, I'm logged in as the SA. I can work in companies 0 through 400 and 600 and that final 999 company, but I can't work in company 500. My executive can work in 0, 1, 2, and 4. My manager, companies 1, 2, and 3, and the clerk only in company 300. Now, had I turned on the account level security, this clerk would not be able to see the GL accounts for anybody or any company except company 300. So they could not even create a transaction that crossed over from one company to another. And in some cases, that is a requirement of the security needed by the GP user. In other cases, that may not need to be locked down quite that tight. In any case, the way this is set, this clerk cannot run reports or cannot post transactions in any company other than company 300. That includes not just the core Dynamics GP, but it includes Smart List and Management Reporter reports as well. Under the entity relation, this is where we can share or restrict those vital master records. So again, by class or by individual member, I can share or restrict vendors, customers, items, and so on. Let's look at just the vendors. If I log into company 000, I'm restricted to doing business only with this group of vendors. Company 100 can share some of the vendors, but can also have its own unique set as well. Company 200, again, I'm sharing this first one and restricting it to a unique set, and so on. I set this up company by company. So when I add a new vendor, instead of having to create that vendor master record 15 different times in each of my 15 databases, and then managing and maintaining and reporting on it 15 times, I create the master record once, and I simply say these companies are allowed to do business with this vendor. The power of that will become more clear when we get to the reporting side. Under the intercompany distribution accounts, we set up those vital due to, due from accounts that are required when a transaction crosses from one company to another. So if my transaction originates with company 000 and crosses over to company 100, Multi-Entity Manager knows which accounts to use for the due to, due froms, and we set this up company by company. So we set it up once, and we can forget about it. We can also set up checkbooks, either individual checkbooks, different checkbooks per company, or we could use the same checkbook, but of course, because each checkbook has a single GL account behind it tied to the company that owns it, those due to, due from transactions would happen if another company used that checkbook. So you can do pooled cash, but through the due to, due froms, keep track of who owns how much of that cash. We also have an option that allows you to work either centralized or decentralized. So I have a mixed environment here, and I've said, for example, in AP, that my head office can pay the bills for company 1, 2, 4, and 6. So I've got some centralization. Company 300 would be on its own. It would work decentralized. Now, let's go look at some transactions where some of this is going to make a lot more sense. I'm going to do just a very basic payables transaction. I could show you an SOP. I could show you a purchase order. I could show you an AR transaction. It doesn't matter. The functionality of Multi-Entity Manager is exactly the same, but this is a very simple one to follow. I'm going to start with this transaction. I'm logged into company 000, as we see here in the top left. So when it opens, it says, great, this transaction belongs to company 0, and I could proceed to create my transaction. But if for a single transaction, assuming I have the security rights to it, I want it to work in company 100, I could simply change it here. I can also, if I wanted to, change or add a department to this transaction as well. Let's go pick a vendor. Notice I don't have to scroll through 100, 150 vendors to find the one I want. It's restricted to that list that we were granted in the security. I'm going to grab my vendor. I'm going to put some dollars on this transaction. And let's go look at the distributions. But before we do that, let's see what the default accounts are behind this vendor account. By default, my accounts payable is a 000 2100 account. My purchases or my expense account is 000 652000. Now, because I am working in a centralized environment, head office is always going to pay the bills. So what I expect to see is a bit of an intercompany transaction here. Let's go have a look. Now, this transaction belongs to company 100, department 10. So Multi-Entity Manager says, hey, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to do some account substitutions. And now, instead of 000 652000, I get 100 652010. The transaction belongs to company 100, department 10. Therefore, that is where the expense goes. Now, because I am working centralized and head office is paying the bills, I don't get any account substitution. I still have a 000 or a head office AP account. Multi-Entity Manager now says, one more thing I'm going to do for you here. Because this crosses over from company 100 to company 0, I'm going to create the proper due to, due froms so that everybody's happy. Cash will continue to balance. Here's another interesting thing that Multi-Entity Manager will do for you. Suppose I'm the clerk that's entering this transaction. I don't really understand all this due to, due from kind of stuff. And I think that this account is wrong. I think this should be a 100 account. So I'm going to change this to 100 2240. Watch what happens when I leave the line. Multi-Entity Manager resets it back to a 000 account. It knows how to balance the due to, due froms, and it says, just because you may not understand it, you may think it's incorrect, trust me, I'm going to make sure it balances each and every time. Now, I can take this a step further. Suppose I want to split the costs with this transaction for company 100 to pay $600, company 200 is going to pay the other $400 or own the expense. What is going to happen now? As soon as I leave this line, Multi-Entity Manager gets involved again and says, hey, I'm going to help you out. It's now a 60-40 split. There is my accounts payable is $1,000. It then proceeds to build the due to, due froms to make sure that everything continues to balance each and every time, always 100% accurate. Take it one step further. Suppose you have a transaction that you do every month where you have to pull out your calculator and figure out the split between multiple companies. Similar to an allocation account in the core GP product, we have added allocation accounts either by percentage or by amount to Multi-Entity Manager. So this one is by percentage, and it says when I use this allocation ID, split the cost between company 0, department 10, 60%, company 100, department 0, 10%, and 200, 0, 0, 30%. So because I've attached this allocation ID here, all I need to do is select my vendor, put my dollar amounts, and what I'm expecting to see is a 60, 10, 30 split. When I go to my distributions, I have a 60, 10, 30 split, $1,000 AP, and therefore I need the due to, due froms to make this balance. Every time, always accurate. So that's a basic transaction. Again, we could have looked at any transaction type in GP. As long as we have the multi-entity management modules installed and enabled, the same functionality happens. We get account substitution where it's needed. We get due to, due froms where they're needed as well. And again, always accurate, always balanced. Let's look at a couple other redundant processes that we could get rid of. Let's talk again about that accounts payable process. So the end of the month comes, I want to select my checks. Again, we can work centralized or decentralized. I'm in a mixed environment here, so I'll show you both. In a centralized environment, that means that head office, company 000, can pay the bills for anybody. So I'm going to grab a batch that belongs to company 000. When I go to edit a check batch, notice that I can see all of the companies I can pay invoices for. I've got some company zeros, some 100s, some 200s, 400s, and so on, all the way down the list. So this is going to work in a truly centralized environment with the due to, due froms happening in the background as the bills are paid. Now, I can also work in a decentralized environment. I simply turn it on, and it adds this little section to the screen where I can see the list of companies. So I can pick and choose which companies do I want to pay the bills for. Now, when I create a decentralized batch, Multi-Entity Manager will append the company as a prefix to the batch identifier. So I would end up with a 000 dash followed by the batch name, a 100 followed by the batch name, a 200 followed by the batch name, and so on. If we look at the checks for a decentralized batch, what we'll find is the only checks that I can pay, the only invoices I can pay, belong to the company that owns this batch. Decentralized will not allow me to pay the bills for other companies. So you've got that level of security available to you there. And again, all the redundant processes are now simply reduced to saying, run it for these companies. Let's look at reporting and inquiries. A couple quick scenarios. Suppose Ace Travel calls you up and says, there's an invoice that's outstanding. It's number 300-6. Why isn't that paid? Well, you're working in one of your companies and you say, hey, which company does that belong to, Mr. Vendor? They're thinking, don't know, don't care. They just want it paid. They're not going to do your bookkeeping for you. So you now have to write the information down, proceed to log out, log in, log out, log in, log out, log in, trying to find that invoice. Multi-Entity Manager makes this so easy. Let's go to the transactions by vendor. We'll call up Ace Travel. Now, we don't know which company this transaction belongs to. Here's the list of companies, and we have added this to virtually every inquiry and every report in Dynamics GP, assuming the multi-entity management module is installed. You simply come in and say, I don't know, so I'm going to mark them all. Whoops, clicked on mark. Mark them all and put in the invoice number. So the vendor says it's invoice 300-6. Let's put in 300-6. And which company does it belong to? Again, because we don't know, we're going to let Multi-Entity Manager do the work. We hit redisplay, and it will go out and it will find the invoices. There's my invoice 300-6. It belongs to company 300, and I can drill in, I can see it, and there's a note that says, oh, backup's required. Mr. Vendor, you didn't send me the backup. Do that, and I'll get the bill paid. So being able to slice and dice the data becomes so simple that Multi-Entity Manager can do the work for you. Let's look at another scenario. We'll take out this invoice number. Suppose I'm trying to buy a travel voucher from Ace Travel, and they say, sorry, you're over your credit limit. Ooh, really? I didn't realize that. Now, I'm going to have to go out and run reports across each of my companies to try to figure out what do I owe them and where's the best place to pay it so that I can get this travel voucher purchased. That's a lot of work. Again, Multi-Entity Manager makes it easy. I've got all of my companies checked. I'm simply going to hit redisplay, and it will go out and say across all your companies, you owe Ace Travel almost $1.3 million, and I can see company by company exactly how much is owed. Well, wait a minute. I didn't even know that San Francisco owed them any money. I want a little more information on this. Let's drill into this. Let's slice and dice this a little bit. Easiest way to do that? Unmark all the companies, select only San Francisco, and redisplay. And down below, I see a list of only the $32,000 that it owes. I can now drill in and do some slicing and dicing there. I can look at it. I can investigate, see how much is outstanding, company by company. So being able to get in and out again makes it so much easier to look at the information instead of having to log out and log in. What about from a report standpoint? Let's go up to the trial balance. Again, we have modified the reports to add this section. I've simplified this. It's selecting Ace Travel only. And when I check all my companies and print the report, it will show me on the far left which company each of these invoices and payments belongs to. So I can see each of my companies as I scroll down. And then, of course, when I get to the bottom, I see the aging for a consolidation of all of my companies. Well, what if I want to only see a few companies? I want to check out the Midwest. Okay, I'm going to unmark them all, select only Dallas and Denver, print it again. That's assuming Dallas and Denver are Midwest, of course. I can see my 300 and my 400 and my aging across the bottom. So again, being able to get the data back out of the database becomes so much easier. I don't have to worry about doing this multiple times across multiple companies. We've taken it one step further again with the smart lists. All of the out-of-the-box smart lists have been modified, and of course you can do this with smart lists that you build as well, to include that company identifier here under the entity column, so I can see which company these transactions belong to. And of course, I have the ability to come in here and search where that entity belongs to a certain company only. I click OK, and it shows me only that company's transactions. So getting the information back out becomes very, very simple. Let's jump back over to our PowerPoint. So we looked at Dynamics GP, basic setup of Multi-Entity Manager, some of the security layers that we can add in there. And that's in addition to the tasks and the roles that are already part of Dynamics GP out of the box. We looked at some basic transactions. We looked at how it does the account substitutions, the intercompany due-to, do-froms where they are required. We looked at how easy it is to get the information back out of the database, either company, by group of companies, or consolidated through inquiries, through reports, or through smart lists. So what are the next steps? Well, let's talk about your needs. As a next step, we recommend that you reach out to Steve Ewing, the Director of Business Development here at Endeavour Solutions. Steve is a seasoned business executive and can help you frame your vision around ERP, Microsoft Dynamics GP, and multi-entity reporting. Steve's contact information is showing on the screen.